Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. I'm Andrew Langer, your host, and want to thank you for joining us today. If you're watching us on YouTube, we're available on all major podcast platforms, some minor ones as well. If you're watching us on one of those many podcast platforms or listening to us there, you can watch us on YouTube as well. Subscribe, hit the like button, leave us a review, and most importantly, let your friends and family members and your family members' friends, let everybody you know how much, how much you're enjoying the Lunch Hour podcast. So much looking forward to our guest today. Met him at a recent conference. Can't get into it because it's all secret what we did. But his name is David Dunmoyer, and he's the campaign director for Better Tech for Tomorrow at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. In this role, he publishes research and commentary, provides expert testimony, and advocates for responsible technology policy in the Texas legislature. His portfolio includes data privacy, cybersecurity, kids' online safety, AI, broadband, and other emerging technology issues. Prior to this role, he served as the chief of staff to the executive team at TPPF after spending several years working in digital affairs and digital marketing. He received undergraduate degrees at Texas Christian University and graduate of the Masters of Public Affairs from the University of Texas at Austin's LBJ School of Public Affairs. And he's got a compelling life story. And we're gonna get into that because part of the reason why I want to have him on to talk about tech policy, but part of the reason why I wanted to have him on was because he told this story about his own experiences that we gotta get into. First of all, let's actually start here with this, David. You grew up in California and you made it to Texas. I had a conversation with Chuck DeVore recently about this. What to you is the biggest contrast between California and Texas?
Yeah, well, Andrew, first off, so glad to be on the show. Thank you for having me. Man, the biggest contrast, in many respects, and not just because I've drank the Kool-Aid in Texas, it feels like a whole new country going from California to Texas. And, there's the top lines, a lot of the data pulling that comes out. It's the economic opportunity. It's, with jobs and cost of living. Ultimately, the biggest contrast for me has been culture, and it's the people here. And it's not just the hospitability of walking down the street and people actually say hello, a two-part greeting, but it's this notion that we are part of something in Texas that in California, there is just natural beauty in scores and great geographic potential, and all that has been taken for granted. And I think there's this inherent understanding in Texas that we're part of something special, and that culture has really just been a diametrical difference that's been so neat and refreshing.
It is interesting because California styles itself as a republic, but Texas really embraces it, right? And maybe that's the difference. There is that. It's funny because there is this movie we've been talking about this movie Civil War that's coming out, which assumes an alliance between Texas and Florida. And now that I think about it, right, though the politics are very different, there is a certain heritage similarity there that has resulted in very different outlooks and outcomes. Your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the history of California and, juxtaposing with Texas. For Texas, folks leaving the comfort of the colonies to come and homestead and set up in what's probably, it was at the time, the most unsafe part of the world with Comanches and Apaches and arid land that was meant to root out the people who couldn't handle it. California, you have the gold rush. You had a lot of people who came there and it was bleak conditions, trying to make it. And again, leaving the comfort of your home to strike it big. So there was that risk seeking nature in California and Texas. And there's so many different things you can point to in California. I think it's a road, what's the saying? Good intentions, but the road ultimately paved to hell for California versus Texas. and it's myriad of factors. And I'm sure Chuck got into that having been in the legislature when he was on your show. One of the things, my dad has worked in conservative politics in California since before I was born. And he would say it really is just a taking for granted the God-given beauty of California. and the kowtowing to the woke mob and not being principled and resolved really post-Reagan in California during his governorship. There hasn't been a strong leader who understands that sometimes taking the correct road means unpopularity. And we saw that with Schwarzenegger. That was my first real foray into politics. I was a kid, but I was old enough to understand that as a populist, as somebody who wanted to cater to the masses, you can't really have a clear, principled vision if you're going to let people, your constituency, sway you. And at that time, it was really climate hysteria, which has turned into religious fanaticism in California. So leadership, culture, but you're right. We share a lot of that same heritage. So it's really sad to see the differences.
It's interesting because there's one of the things we were talking about was this issue. There are parts of California that I love, even the Central Valley, right? And the Central Valley gets its knocks. But I have a great affinity for places in California's Central Valley like, Los Banos and Gustine and even Modesto and Stockton, et cetera. But the contrast, of course, is you have the same kind of climate in places like the Texas Hill Country. And again, huge affinity there. And the people of Texas do not take the Hill Country for granted. It is an absolute gem, right? I think there are people in San Francisco and LA and the Napa Valley who, if they could wall off the Central Valley, they would. Texans have no interest in doing that to the Hill Country or West Texas, et cetera, et cetera. There's an embracing. Let's shift gears for a second. And sure. I want to come back to your upbringing, and I want to come back to your experience. But talk about getting involved in tech policy and how that happened.
Yeah. So by way of kind of skipping through the decades of me figuring life out, I find myself at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And initially, as you read my bio, I actually started in development here, so working on some of the grants and proposals. And then I should say I started as an intern when I was in grad school. And as I'm at the foundation, Kevin Roberts was CEO at the time. And we had worked together on a number of projects. And he asked me to serve as his chief of staff because I had a background in policy and public affairs, some legislative advocacy and engagement work that I had done, and then really just making sure all the trains are running on time. Yeah. But in that role, I spent a lot of time with Kevin talking about the future of the movement. And this is around 2021 when there wasn't a clear, true north conservative tech policy, state-based tech policy outfit. And in Texas, we've had a lot of tech bills. And House Bill 20 from, the 87th legislature in 2021, that was viewpoint discrimination legislation. And Senator Brian Hughes here and Representative Briscoe Cain, who are just great champions for liberty.
Hold on. There's a Texas name for you, Briscoe Cain.
Briscoe Cain, that's right.
Yeah, I love it. Anyway, go ahead.
And I encourage your viewers to look him up too, because he got canceled on social media. And it was a little spat he had with Beto O'Rourke. I don't remember what Beto was running for at this time because he's run for every office under the sun. But Briscoe had posted a picture on Twitter after Beto threatened him, and Briscoe posted a picture of his guns and just said, "Come and take it." So Briscoe gets taken off Twitter and starts this whole movement in Texas in the legislature where they recognize, look, there needs to be this discussion that isn't happening in a lot of state houses on Section 230 and reform of that kind. So to answer your question, how did we get involved? Well, we ultimately recognized that it was time for TPPF to take up a tech policy initiative. And in a former life, I had worked on a couple of bills in California when I was doing public affairs on the opposite side in their legislature, what they were working on. So since I had that experience, I worked with Kevin to build out this new initiative. And we brought on a full team. And it's been about two and a half years now, and the rest is history.
But it creates a really interesting contrast because a lot of states have tried to replicate the success of Silicon Valley. And you have, outside of Boston and Massachusetts, you've got, Maryland, you've got Northern Virginia. But all of those states are plagued, I think, with some of the same political problems that California is. Texas is a truly free market state, at least the way I read it. You can tell me if I'm wrong, that is now trying to do it right and not sort of let the leftist tech gurus sort of dictate the policy terms. Am I reading that correctly?
No, you're 100% spot on. And I know we talked about Peter Rex, who's just one of many entrepreneurs that have come from California to Texas. And to paint the picture, Elon Musk talks about the woke town square that is Berkeley, that is the Bay Area. And it really creates this Stockholm syndrome where the software engineers and the folks that are working on developing social media companies or the next big AI company are infused with wokeist ideology. And so contrast that with Texas, where we don't do that here, so to speak. And we believe in faith, family, and freedom. And you're seeing those values starting to really spread into the entrepreneurial landscape here, which I would contend when we're looking at a legacy building company, something that's going to transcend your time here, your service in the business world. Those are the values that will span decades and centuries when your companies are looking to elevate humanity and really move us forward, which is, it couldn't be further from the truth from some of the Silicon Valley tech types.
Well, and it's interesting, right? Because I think it's having an added impact on places like Austin, right? I have a friend who used to quip that the great thing about Austin is that it's so close to Texas, right? It's its own separate entity. And to some extent, the city of Dallas is like that as well. But we're seeing, I've been reading about, we're seeing a shift in the politics of Austinites away from, they're still, keep Austin, what keep Austin weird. But we are seeing some of the anti-woke values, I should say, sort of creeping, right? There was a referendum a couple of years ago about policing, as I recall. You might be able to talk a little bit about, but am I right in thinking that this has had the effect of actually moving Austin a little bit further to the right?
Yeah, that's 100% correct. Yeah. And I've been in Austin for 4 years now, so not as long as some of the folks who can speak to the decades building here. But to your point, it was homelessness and law and order, the lack thereof, that were really the impetus for a lot of folks who, not conservative by any stretch of the imagination, but recognize, okay, maybe what I was trying to flee in New York City and Chicago that's being recreated here is in fact a net negative. And the city of Austin, its people did vote to do away with public camping. So when I first moved here post-pandemic, I mean, you could walk down 6th Street, the 35 overpass, and it was communes, full-blown tent cities, Hoovervilles that were set up there. And it's since gotten better. It's not great. But between that and then the defunding of the police, where Austin was ground zero in a lot of respects, and the horrible tragedy, as we all know, is when you don't have a well-funded law enforcement, you're starting to see crimes not being addressed, and it creates this whole mentality where I can get away with things because there isn't anyone enforcing this. And for about 2.5, 3 years, you really saw that uptick here in Austin, as we've seen in other major cities. So those issues are really galvanizing folks to take a more moderate approach. There's still so much work to be done here in Austin, but at least those two issues have kind of crept into the public psyche of Austin. And we want to keep it weird, but that doesn't mean homeless people who are panhandling and holding you at knife point, which was par for the course in 2020.
It's interesting. I remember I knew something was fundamentally going in the wrong way. Years ago, I visited Terry Black's Barbecue, which is one of my favorite barbecue places in Austin. And somebody moved in, some kind of, I think, some corporate executive, woke corporate executive, moved into a house nearby Terry Black's and was upset about the smell of barbecue smoke. I'm like, listen, play stupid games, win super prizes. You moved into the neighborhood. It's Texas, for Pete's sake. At the very least, it's not mesquite. And not that I have a problem with grilling over mesquite, but still, it's like this is a cherished way of life. As an aside, do you remember the first time you had a Texas brisket?
I 100% do. It's one of those formative moments that every, Texan by choice remembers. So I went to school at Texas Christian University, and about 10 minutes away from campus, there's this place called Heim Barbecue, Heim.
Sure.
And their brisket is phenomenal. I remember, because in California, you probably know, it's tri-tip. And
very much so. Love tri-tip.
Yeah, tri-tip is wonderful. Tri-tip sandwich with coleslaw, one of my favorite things to get in Pomona. But brisket, that was just a religious experience. And then Heim has this twice baked potato salad, which is exactly what it sounds like. And then, to your point, Terry Black's and some of the great places we have in Austin, to not taking things for granted. That's one I will never take for granted.
I will tell you something. And I love brisket. I do love brisket. The greatest brisket I've ever had was not in Texas. It's a Texas style brisket, but at Rodney Scott's Barbecue in Charleston, South Carolina. It is worth it. In fact, I'm going down there this weekend. My mouth's watering as I'm talking about it. Listen, so let's actually go back to this because and I know I'm jumping around, but I'm doing it for a reason. I think it helps if we go a little nonlinear for a while. Mm-hmm. So you're in California. You grew up in the northern Central Valley, as I recall.
Sacramento. Yep.
Sacramento, the Big Sac. Got it. And you go to school out there, and your freshman year, you decided, what was the course you decided to take?
Women's Studies.
Women's Studies. Took a Women's Studies class. And listen, I shouldn't laugh about this, folks. I'm not that I issue trigger warnings, but this is a serious story, and I think it's worth telling. Talk about what happened with this Women's Studies class, and how it made you eventually decide to make that transformation and become a Texan by choice.
Right. And, I think when I shared this story, I didn't share at this time, I'm a freshman, I'm 17 years old, starting university at California State University, Chico, and always did sports, enjoyed that. So I thought kinesiology was what I was going to study. So we'll get to how that all changed. So yes, I'm in a women's studies course, and I remember calling my dad and telling him, hey, here are my classes. He's like, why are you taking this class? He's like, you're going to be public enemy number one. Right. And I did. And part of it was I saw, as Americans have seen really up until the last decade, higher education as the opportunity to grapple intellectually and have disagreements in a space that's conducive to learning and growing. So I take it for that reason, and it's a double dip. So I get, 2 of my credits fulfilled. And so
hold on for a second before you keep. Yep. I mean, this is an important point because what you're saying should be a universal truism, right? Mm-hmm. If we want to understand each other, we have to be able to have discussions about things. That's what a college campus is supposed to be like. So you, as a 17-year-old conservative man taking a women's studies course, you should be embraced and brought in. Now, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're 100% spot on. And apparently, I was Pollyannish and naive to think that going into college.
Yes.
So I take this course, and it's, me and there's 2 other of my guy friends who are in that class, and then 25 or so other women. And it was very clear from the start that there was an overwhelming cohort of very militant voices that were just anti-male patently. And so in that environment, I was raised to be socially aware, raised to be a gentleman. I'm not going to start any disagreements for the sake of starting a disagreement. So really bit my tongue for the first month or so in class and, engaged periodically. And I met with my professor in office hours, and we were talking, and I was just sharing not really concerns, but more so asking questions about the kind of dialogue she was trying to promote and so on. And the conversation ended very positively, and she encouraged me to speak up more and complimented me on being thoughtful and articulate. Okay, that's the confidence I needed to know that this is an environment where I can bring up dissent. So I do, and I'm very respectful about it. And some of the comments I made, I won't get into all of them, but there was, one instance where a Rush Limbaugh tape was played, and I remember hearing the full thing. I grew up, in Sacramento, where Rush had a lot of his meteoric rise, and I'd heard the full tape, and they played something in class taken totally out of context. So raised my hand, and I disagreed on that. And I think that's where I painted the target on my back.
Oh boy,
a Rush sycophant, I think somebody called me. But all that to say, the semester progresses, and the cohort of the more militant voices made very clear they did not enjoy me being present. There was nothing overtly bad. And then to make a long story short, we have the option for our final project to submit a video, and we could choose to agree or disagree with something that was taught throughout the course of the semester. And at this point, I was straight A's in all the assignments. I never missed a day of class. I showed up, I engaged, I participated, and I chose to disagree with something that was taught in the course. And turns out I was the only student that chose to disagree, which I think, Andrew, kind of goes back to your initial point, which is the environment is conducive now to just biting your tongue and doing and saying whatever you need to in order to get that grade. And I was not raised that way. I was raised to speak truth, and even if it's painful and uncomfortable. So I did a video, and we had a
hold
guest
on.
lecturer.
Time out for a second, David. Because yes, you were raised to speak truth and to speak your mind on things. You did bite your tongue for the first, third of the class, more than a third of the class. The professor herself had said to you, you could feel free to speak up more, and because you had this, obviously the way you were raised, but then you had your instincts kick in. You know that that one of these things is not like the other, or as they say, the cheese stands alone.
Yeah.
And you do raise your voice, so you think, okay, I have an opportunity. This is going to be this professor she is not the stereotypical woke professor who's going to judge me based upon me parroting back what she has said to me, which I find that's the kind of teaching that we decry. Now, I'm sorry for interrupting there, but I just wanted to say my piece on this. Go ahead.
No, that is true, and very, very important to this part of the story too. And for what it's worth, my thought process in choosing to disagree with something, as I mentioned, I was studying kinesiology, and one of the we had a whole 2-3 week series on the fitness industry and health, and that was something I was passionate about. And the guest lecturer effectively said that it is not just moot, but it is asinine to focus on promoting your health because it's all for naught anyways. And it's kind of the fat shaming culture and ableism and things of that nature.
Okay.
I don't think they had terms for it at this point, but it was the precursor to all that. And it was wrong. It was flat out, like objectively wrong. And so I thought to myself, A, this is good for what I'm studying. And B, it's actually more challenging to formulate a coherent disagreement to a contention versus just blindly accepting something as truth. So I put a lot of time and effort into this video. It's very well researched. I'm not making any subjective claims. I'm not attacking the speaker. And I have to go back. I haven't watched this video in a while, but I'm 17. I put my suit on to record the video, and I took it seriously. And so I submitted what I believe to be A+ quality, just not even relative to the rest of the students, but just based on what was asked of me.
Sure.
And I submit this, and a week later I get my grade back, and it's an F. And she flunked me, and it was weighted enough to where this would have precluded me from having finished this class. I'd have to retake it. And so, of course, like any good college student, I run to my professor's office hours and I ask, "Hey, I'm a little confused here. Can you walk me through why I got this grade?" Because the only comment that was submitted was something to the effect of, "This was not you did not fulfill the purpose of this assignment."
Okay.
And so I asked, "Can you please expand on this?" And she couldn't really provide an explanation other than, you chose to focus on something that clearly you're passionate about, but it doesn't speak for the entire course of women's studies. And to which I, of course, showed her the assignment that said we can pick to focus on one thing from the semester. And I'm like, okay, well, let's agree to disagree. Can I do something to modify this? Nope, it's final, signed, sealed, delivered. And that shocked me because normally in that situation, if there is some kind of misunderstanding, there's, "Hey, David, look, if you do this or you do something different." But no, it was a brick wall, a stone wall. And I said, "Okay, well, I don't believe that this is a fair assessment.
Right.
I'm going to speak to the dean of the college." And as I told you, I found out later that day when looking up who the dean was and setting up a meeting that was the mentor of my professor.
Sure.
And at this point, I was pretty daunted, but we're still going to give it a shot. So I talked to the dean, and the dean effectively said, "Oh, no, we trust the professor's judgment on this. And there is a formal mediation process if you want to go through rectification, but I don't think it's going to."
And time out. That's a dodge, right? Because that's the way they're saying, I don't know if you ever saw the series Band of Brothers. Did you ever see Band of Brothers?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, Captain Sobel, he's unhappy about Lieutenant Winters, so he's going to restrict him to base. He says, "Well, you can appeal via a court-martial, but you don't want to go through that because it's such a hassle, blah, blah, blah." And Winters, elects to go through it. So they're counting on you just sucking it up, which, by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt here, David. Actually, I'm not so sorry, but, I'm interrupting. The thing that gets me, as someone who taught in the university setting, my goal was fluency. I wanted my students to be fluent in the subject matter. Yeah. This seems to be the ultimate kind of gotcha moment where if again, the left uses this concept of the teachable moment. This should have been a teachable moment, right? If the professor was really interested in women's studies and taking a young male, 17-year-old conservative and trying to teach him something in the way of the world, I mean, she obviously gave you a lesson, which we're going to get a little more into, not the lesson she really wanted. But if she really wanted to sort of write this whole thing of this idea, anyway, I was going to say something, I won't say it. But the point is about sort of the governance by feminists and feminism, the anti-patriarchy, et cetera, that is supposed to be more just and caring in society. One would think that she would say, okay, something, you didn't understand the assignment. You have X number of days to do this. Anyway, so you go through, you go and you initiate the process.
Yeah, and I want to follow, because that's a great point. And that's equity, right? At the end of the day, the notion is if I'm the enemy, then equity means that the outcome we have is suppressing you and pushing you down. And it does a lot of things. One is it can create cynicism and jaded mentality. Why
100%.
would there be any opportunity for us to correspond or collaborate? And I'll get to the punchline of the story.
Yeah.
Because you're absolutely right. The goal was, okay, this is way too onerous. This is insurmountable. He's done. At this point, he's just going to retake the class because it's way easier. And of course,
retake the class so you can fail it again. But go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Insanity, right?
Yeah.
And so I hear that there's an opportunity.
Sorry, it is the definition of Kafkaesque. Sorry. Yes. Go ahead. Yes.
There it is. So, the dean says, hey, the mediated route, you can go about it that way and see if rectification is possible. And I didn't really know what was meant by this, but I said, sure, let's get a mediator. And so it was a mediated discussion that was, a couple days following my meeting with the dean between my professor and the mediator and myself. And it was basically a chance for us to share our side of the story and walk through what had happened. And it for the most part, for the first, I think it was an hour-long meeting, the first 20, 30 minutes was pretty amicable. And
hold on, David, let me interrupt again. At this point in time, because again, folks, you have to understand, David told the story and it was in the context of a whole bunch of things we were talking about. Did your parents know about this? I mean, I know, like, if I failed a class in college, I didn't talk to my parents about it. I know if my kids were in the same position and they were dealing with this, I would want them to come to me, and I would obviously go to their defense. Go to the mattresses, as they say in The Godfather, for this. Did your dad know what was going on here?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
Because again, I'd done well in the class up until the final grade. I called my dad and I was shocked. It wasn't even like emotional or anything. I just remember being baffled. I was like, Dad, what do I do?
Right.
Like, well, you've met with her before, right? I'm like, yes. Like, we'll go to her office hours and see if she's willing to have a discussion. Maybe this is a mistake. I think my dad, he knew. I later talked to him. He's like, I think I know what's going on here. But he thought, to your point too, this is a great teachable moment, father and son. We're going to teach you how to use the process because there is one, and there are institutions that exist for a reason. Even if we don't trust them, we can try and navigate. And so he encouraged me to go through with this, and he coached me through the mediation process too, just to be very respectful.
Right.
You can't say yes, ma'am, yes, sir in California because you might trigger someone, but being respectful. And so we're in this mediated discussion. Everything's going fine. And then I commit the cardinal sin. My professor had her doctorate, and I referred to her as professor and instead of doctor. And she slams her hand on the table, points at me, and says, this is the exact chauvinism and misogyny that he brought every single day to my class. I'm confused. I don't even know what she's referencing.
Time out for a second. In class, did people refer to her as Dr. Smith, or did they refer to her as Professor Smith?
Both.
Okay.
So
and she didn't turn around and correct, Madam Feminist over here who called her Professor Smith. She didn't say, no, that's Dr. Smith. Thank you very much. I didn't spend 6 years at evil PhD school to be referred to as professor. Thank you very much. Sorry,
that's correct.
Go ahead. Yeah.
And my retort, albeit was probably, I wasn't trying to be cheeky, but my retort was, it's more of an honor to have professor because you can be a doctor, but not all doctors are professors.
Sure,
and that
absolutely.
really just, that lit the fuse. And
how dare you, man? How dare you mansplain her pain to her, David? Shame on you. At 17 years old, for not having the emotional and intellectual capacity to sort of, I'm sorry to say this, to read the room.
I know.
But but again, you get your back up. And you're like, your emotions take hold, and God forbid. I mean, here's the thing, right? God forbid. I know what I would have done at age 53, what I would have done in that situation. But you're age 17, and you have a tremendous amount of composure here. And you're right. You say this thing, and then what happens?
Yeah. So at that point, the mediated discussion was effectively called off, and that's where my doctor had told me that this was all for naught, and there's no amicable agreement we can come to. So the next step, as part of the kangaroo court, was for me to present my case if I so chose. Again, hey, David, you don't have to do this. It's a lot of work, but if you wanted to present your case in front of a faculty court, you can bring 2 witnesses with you and present your case as to why you need rectification for this grade. And so I say, great, let's do it.
But time out for a second. What this is about? I mean, this is now turned into you questioning a grade on a final assignment into you having to somehow, I mean, right, your grades on the previous assignments were your grades. Presumably, she had also been taking notes about your class participation and factoring those in. Witnesses for what? Witnesses to how they understood the assignment?
That's a phenomenal question.
Yeah.
When the pretext is that I'm guilty until proven innocent, they can do whatever they want. So
and you could bring 2 witnesses. How many could the professor bring?
Well, that wasn't established, so yes. I didn't know. And so I'm at I don't even remember the timeline on this. This has happened pretty quickly after this mediated discussion. I have a lot of time to assemble my thoughts, and of course, I call my dad again. And he's at this point, he's like, this is ridiculous. Yeah. Obviously, you're going to do this, son, and you're going to do the best dang defense of your case as you possibly can. My dad's not a lawyer, but he's worked in public policy.
He's played one on TV.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, he coaches me up. And, I give my intro remarks, and I explain the nature of why I chose to do the presentation the way that I did. And I was, again, allowed 2 witnesses who spoke to my character and said, David's an upstanding person. He never said anything fraught with controversy. He always was mindful, et cetera, et cetera. It was fine. It wasn't the most stellar defense of my character. But, we're kids. We're kids at this point. So I give my remarks, and there was no really back and forth between the panel, but it seemed like they're like, okay, sufficiently convinced that this kid isn't in fact a Nazi. And then my professor gives her remarks and proceeds to excoriate my character and throw every ism my way and talk about how disruptive of force and voice I was in the class. And at this point, I had expected vitriol, but what came out of her mouth was, I was deflated. And to your question, how many witnesses was she allowed? As I should have said this. So after my witnesses spoke, we walked outside to adjourn for a break, and I see 12 students lined up, all from my class. And and they're all staring at me, with smug grins. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, she brought the whole cohort of militant feminists to crucify me. And sure enough, after my professor gives her remarks, they come one after another with unique, some of them just made up stories, like completely made up stories of things I didn't say. Right. And it was, again, it felt like kangaroo court. And I'm sitting here out of body.
Franz Kafka's The Trial comes to life. Go ahead. Yeah.
That's right. And I'm out of body, and I don't even know. I couldn't control my nonverbals. I'm just confused. I'm thinking, I'm expelled. Am I expelled from this university? What's going to happen now? And so lo and behold, this plays out. It must have been an hour of getting my character torn apart. And I'm allowed concluding remarks. And in my concluding remarks, I chose not to address all the comments that were made to me. Instead, I asked for the panel to review the video. Because at this point, nobody had reviewed the video. I said, just please watch. And if you feel that, what they said is reflected in my video, then at that point, there's nothing I can do and say. Because I was so confident in the content I had created. Oh, go ahead.
No, it's a brilliant strategy, because you're right. At the end of the day, this is not about you and your character and what you were saying in class. This is about whether or not, you read the assignment out loud and you play the video, right?
Yeah.
This is the assignment. This is the video. The question is not whether or not I'm an a-hole. The question is whether or not I completed the assignment.
Yes.
And more to the point, right? Stop for a second. Let's stop for a second, because it's not as though you're asking for an A, right? That's not what you could hope for here, right? You're not asking, right? There's a wide space between an A on the assignment and a 0 on the assignment, which is essentially what an F is.
Yep.
Right? You're not asking for 100. You're just not asking for a 0. How about you give me enough of a grade on the assignment that I pass with a C? I'll take a C at this point. Sorry. So you ask them to play the video.
Yeah. So they play the video, and, at this point, I think it's pretty clear to me that they see this like, wow, this is actually very, very innocuous content.
Right.
And I think you hit the nail on the head, because the case they were trying to make is that I was an entitled prick, and that I was going through this process to waste everyone's time.
Right. Availing yourself of the process that is available to you so you can protect your rights. That's a form of privilege. That's got it. How dare you do this? Go ahead.
Yeah,
yes.
I'm the oppressor class in that case. So anyways, this all concludes, and I will never forget, calling my dad on the way out and thinking to myself, I didn't know what was going to happen, although I felt it in my heart. Like, I think I'm going to be okay. I think,
you're hoping. Yeah.
I'm hoping that at least, maybe push my grade up a little bit, or at the very least, I'm not getting expelled. And calling my dad and saying, okay, I need to look at different universities. And it was tough for me, because having just left this, there were two thoughts. One is, I can continue to fight, and I can try and be a lone conservative voice who literally just makes his way through, not unscathed, but full of scratches, full of bruises. And I try and use whatever influence I have to be a force.
I'm not going to let them beat me down. I'm going to stick up for it. Got it. That's one choice, but go ahead.
One choice, and the other at that point felt like a capitulation, that they had won and I'm running with my tail between my legs. And my dad told me, he's like, look, you're going to be miserable. They're going to make your life miserable. At this point, if this is your freshman year and this is happening to you, and you're not even in some of the, if I would have taken poli-sci classes, I don't know what would have happened. But he ultimately advised me, he's like, look at different universities. And I'd worked my butt off in high school, and I didn't want to accept that had to be my undergraduate career. And Andrew, one of the things that we talked about over last weekend was not letting trauma or not letting these sufferings define us. Sure. And my favorite piece of scripture is Romans 3-5. And it's, we also rejoice in suffering, because suffering breeds perseverance, character, and character hope. And ultimately, it took me a lot of time to get to that point where, that story absolutely jump-started my desire. But
David, what happened? What did they do? What did the board do?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm still here, so I haven't been killed.
Yes.
They ultimately did give me a higher grade.
There you go.
I passed the class.
There you go. Okay.
My swan song, and got the heck out of that university.
And you said, stay fresh, cheese bags. I'm out of here. Yeah.
Yes. And, I should say, what is that whole process was just insane. Right. And to no surprise, I look back, and the professor's still there. Not only that, the professors received awards and honors and distinction. And that was the canary in the coal mine for me. Again, this is in 2013, 2014. Okay. And this is before the Trump effect in higher education. But I saw the writing on the walls. I knew it was going to happen to California State University schools. And Texas Christian University was one of the few I looked at in Texas. But I realized that, okay, I need to go to a place where I can actually instill rigor in an environment that's not seeking to destroy me every day. Yes, I need dissonance. Yes, I need opposition. But my dad was right that I would have been miserable, and perhaps I wouldn't have graduated from university if I chose to speak up again.
Right, and that's exactly it. It's one of those things where that's what they wanted. They wanted to grind you down, right? They want to make you into a widget, and bend to their will, or they want to cast you out. And there's actually nothing wrong in the end. I know it's like, but if I do this, they win. And we have this. Here's the thing, as conservatives, libertarians, conservatarians, folks who exist on that spectrum, there is something very much innate in us about wanting to push back against the yoke of tyranny. Well, this is a form of tyranny, whether it's Marxism or cultural Marxism or authoritarianism or statism or whatever, that is an offensive thing to us. Plus, we are rationalists. So when there is this disconnect between, not that I'm acting as your therapist here, David, but I'm acting as your therapist, there is this dissonance between what is happening and what we're, and plus, listen, here's the other thing to keep in mind. This is a state school. You have due process rights. And I'm sorry, the other part of this, I know I'm a little bit all over the place, but your dad's also thinking, well, why would I pay money? Why would I pay money to an institution that doesn't want my son there?
Yeah.
Or why is my son paying money to an institution that doesn't want him there? Why are we paying money? Why would he pay money for him to be miserable for another 3.5, 4 years? Go someplace that's going to actually allow him to grow and flourish, as you clearly have. Listen, I want to turn our attention. So this is who you are. You go to Texas. You go to the LBJ school, which is a great school at Austin. You wind up at TPPF. Let's just talk a little bit more about the issues that are going on today. It was a great story.
Yeah.
But I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about this. So as we're taping this, a week ago, the FCC announces that they're going to bring back net neutrality. Your thoughts here on this?
Yeah, so we're a state-based think tank. We tend to work and operate in the Texas legislature, as pictured behind me. And we choose not to engage in a lot of national federal issues because oftentimes Congress doesn't act, and so we can provide education, awareness, and advocacy. But we focus on Texas. Now, net neutrality is back to college, and I promise I have more than just college. But I remember in my media law class talking about net neutrality under Ajit Pai, and it was during the Trump administration. It was going to be the end of the internet as we all knew it. And you have Chuck Schumer and Bernie Sanders tweeting out, we will receive the internet in one word, and everything was going to go to hell in a handbasket. And that was a formative moment when I started getting in policy, and I saw what happened with net neutrality, or I should say the open internet order, which is that there was market improvements in efficiencies in economizing investments in the ISP market. Consumers were benefiting and reaping the benefits of having an open internet system. And that debate was over. At that point, there was a natural experiment we had to point to. The Obama era administration guidelines on closing off and regulating ISPs, the Trump administration opening them up. We have incontrovertible evidence which indicates that the current system, that whenever this goes live, April 25, when they're going to reverse what's working so well, the current system is the greatest for consumers. And so net neutrality, again, back to Texas, we decide, look, this is asinine. The fact that the FCC is prioritizing this under auspices of, I think national security is a new argument they've been using as a use for everything. And let's not forget, the Patriot Act was also the national security argument. And so if the federal government's going to focus when there's so many things happening, we can talk about border security, we can talk about cost of living and all that. But in tech alone, too, data privacy, kids' online safety, there are so many more pressing issues. And so we ultimately, myself and my colleague Grayson Gee, we did a research paper that dropped about 4 months ago, just making the case for why this is the worst possible thing the FCC could do for consumers in the ISP market.
Here's the thing that gets me is that the ostensible initial justification for the early visions of net neutrality and what was attempted to be implemented was this idea of treating each bit of information equally online, right? The net shall be neutral in terms of content, but now it's just the opposite. Again, you talk about Kafka, you talk about Orwell, sort of flipping these terms on their head. Talk about the change, David, between then and now in terms of content moderation on the part of the left. Where does the switch come in? Now, be really clear about something. It's not as though the right was in favor of content moderation over the net before. What we said is that any internet service that was moderating content, that was a losing business model for them. And so, we don't think we need this rule out there to do this. But the left was like, no, we need these rules because we don't want to see, internet service providers choosing, which content can go and which ones can't. And tie this into the latest story about Facebook.
Yeah. So, man, that's a great lead in.
Thanks.
One of the things that we look at, and I think where TPPF has a slightly different research animus on net neutrality is, and I promise I'll connect this to net neutrality.
Please, take your time.
We look at Twitter, Facebook, and other social media companies during the pandemic who had an incestuous relationship with the federal government, the Biden administration. And they are working hand in glove, Zuckerberg with the Biden team, on moderating and censoring content that dared profess the idea that the COVID virus may have originated in China, and things that we now know to be much more veritable, not conspiracies, but realities. And this was, and with the Twitter files and with the unpacking of a lot of the information that's happened, we now have 100% verifiable information that the federal government was and still is working with big tech to accomplish mutual biddings. And part of the lawyers here talk about that in the cat's paw sense, meaning that the federal government can use as a cudgel for these tech companies the threat of regulation.
Right.
If you don't do this, if you don't work with us, we will regulate you. And so, of course, these tech companies will do their bidding. Now, why does that tie into net neutrality? Well, tech companies are very staunch advocates for net neutrality. And there are economic reasons behind this. They want to have preferential treatment when it comes to the provision of broadband, of ISPs. And then there's also, again, you brought up the Meta story, which dropped yesterday. What was that, April 9th?
Yeah.
And it was revealed that Facebook in the 11th hour had approached every member of the FCC with a very persuasive and a very persistent message that they needed to move forward with this regulation. Now, the question you always ask is why and why now? Well, Facebook has tried to be coy and tried to be quiet about this because they don't want to get thrown into the mess of other tech companies that are, calling the end of the world as we know it if we don't pursue net neutrality. But it's also the economic interest that Facebook has for this. And it's the nature with how it played out, too. There hasn't been a lot of reporting. I know Brendan Carr yesterday, he had really broken the internet in sharing this information. And it's one of those things where the left really has done such a good job of painting net neutrality as this obvious, like a puppy act. Who doesn't love puppies? Who doesn't want an internet that's fair and treats everyone equally? Well, that's of course not the case. And if the realization is that this is a big tech push and something they want that benefits their bottom line and not the average consumer, which is in fact the case, then Facebook wouldn't want it revealed that they were lobbying these members. So yeah, all this, I wouldn't say any of this is surprising. I don't know, Andrew, what your reaction to that was, but I
wasn't shocked.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of these things where, when you think about it, of course, they are going to put their thumb on the scale, for this, that they think, because I think there's also a part of this that says that if the FCC goes down this road and engages in this rulemaking, it might head off some of the regulation or some of the legislation that might come down the pipe with Congress. I think that's a foolhardy way of looking at it, but it wouldn't surprise me if that's sort of what they were looking at. But yeah, I mean, listen, we all knew this. To me, it always comes back to, I think a much greater use of the regulatory process in all of this, to some extent, maybe the legislative process, is to peel back terms of service. Right. It's the issue of if Facebook or Meta or whatever platform is promising deliverables in terms of X, in terms of how it's not so much how I consume content, but if I'm promoting content, right? If I'm paying Meta to promote my content, I want to make sure that I'm actually getting promotion of my content and not Meta sucking up my money and then not doing anything with it and claiming, oh, well, just no one's interested in it. It's just part of the noise. But now, as we now know that platforms are shadow banning people, that's the issue, right? If you're paying to be promoted and that promotion is not getting you any eyes on your content, that's a problem. But is it a problem that requires some massive piece of legislation, or does it require the FTC looking into how terms of service are being served? Anyway, that's my thought on all of this.
Yeah. And the one piece I would add, which I don't even know if we had a chance to discuss this, but we've written a number of op-eds and done some content on kind of one of the other reasons why there is an interest to push net neutrality, which is it's a data collection regime that the federal government has codified. There's a lot of data that's coming out from these ISPs, and it would behoove the federal government to have more information on, patriot, freedom-loving Americans. And it is a direct vector for them to suck up huge swaths of data. So they say national security. Anytime you hear that, ears should perk up, especially in the digital landscape. And so that's just another, you look at how much has changed in the last 6-7 years in terms of data that's produced. That's why in 2024, it's that much more palatable to the FCC.
I'm old enough to remember that there was a time when the progressive left was deathly afraid of government collection of data online in the name of national security. But now, because they've somehow made it, at least in their own mindset, that it's the patriots themselves who are anti-American and a threat to national security. Well, that gives us a justification. Dave, before two things before I let you go, one substantive and one fun. TikTok, where do you come down on the TikTok ban?
Yeah. So we, as I said, we focus on Texas-based policy.
I know.
And I'll share by way of what we're doing in Texas. We're working on a number of data privacy bills. We had a huge win on that last session. And so a lot of what we're focusing on here is that social media data privacy and kid safety landscape. And TikTok is one of the worst offenders when it comes to kid safety. And I'd say first, just look at the difference of what ByteDance offers for their Chinese product versus the US. In China, it's an educational platform that talks about pandas and animals and how to get involved in different organizations that are going to help lift up the CCP. And then, of course, in America, it's digital fentanyl. And so there's that piece. There is the national security concern, which is a direct pipeline that feeds private information, personal information of Americans to the CCP. And look, I know there's a lot of discussion, a lot of debate on whether or not this is the most appropriate mechanism. I firmly believe, and TPPF does support the notion of a divestiture. Ultimately, it's not asking too much for the CCP, or I should say ByteDance, although interchangeably, to do what they say they've been doing when testifying before Congress, which is that they don't collect Americans' information and offload it to the CCP. If all that is true and all that wasn't them perjuring themselves during testimony, then this should be an easy layup for them. So we've written a couple of op-eds on it, and ultimately we support the divestiture. We're not holding our breath that Congress, the Senate will pass this through, but it was encouraging to see the House take resolute action on this.
Hey, real quick, I do like to talk to folks in public policy and politics about their outside interest. Almost was going to do a podcast on this. So now that you're living in Texas, when you're not doing your policy work, how do you like to spend your free time?
Yeah. We could do a whole podcast episode on this.
I'm sure. Yes.
I'm in Austin, and I love music. I play guitar and piano.
Oh, do you? Excellent.
If you ever want to talk classic rock,
are you kidding me? Yeah. That's what we could do a whole podcast on. Got it.
Well, yeah. So I spent a lot of time playing guitar and piano. In Austin, we have Lady Bird Lake, which is this beautiful trail, 7 to 10 miles. So I've been getting into running and doing things kind of outside the I love where I work, but the stuffy environment of policy and politics, just getting outdoors and going.
What's number one on your Spotify playlist? What do you always go back to?
Yeah, number one in Spotify playlists. Oh man, it's probably right now it's CCR.
Excellent.
My kind of entry into classic rock, like any good 14-year-old, was Led Zeppelin 3, which is still one of my all-time favorite albums.
Right. The best Led Zeppelin album, Led Zeppelin 3, without a doubt. You had a Tangerine, That's the Way, Bronner Hour. Bronner Hour is not on Physical Graffiti, but go ahead. Yes.
You got Bronner. You got some of the really cool, lesser listened to Led Zeppelin.
Yes.
But yeah, really run the gamut. And then there's some great live music in Austin too. Chance I can make it out to concerts. That's always a fun way to spend the weekend.
Excellent. Well, listen, David Dunmoyer, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
That was David Dunmoyer from the Texas Public Policy Foundation. This has been another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. As I've said, if you're watching us on YouTube, you can also find us on every major podcast platform. If you're listening to us, you can watch the show on YouTube, subscribe, leave us a like, leave us a review, and let everybody know that you're loving the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. As I said, I'm Andrew Langer. Enjoy the rest of your lunch.
This has been the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast, hosted by Andrew Langer. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.